Louanne Brizendine. Es especialista en terapia hormonal, licenciada en medicina por Yale y graduada en neurobiología por Berkeley. Es fundadora y directora de Women's Mood and Hormone Clinic en la Universidad de California en San Francisco. Su bestseller, El cerebro femenino, es una combinación representativa de su extensa experiencia clínica. En este libro constata las diferencias neuroquímicas del órgano pensante de la mujer respecto al del hombre y su mayor capacidad para algunos comportamientos. El cerebro femenino ha sido traducido en más de 24 lenguajes. Su próximo libro, El cerebro masculino, será publicado en 2009.
Mucha gente que conoce el Festival de las Solas Ideas y que ha seguido con atención esta serie de programas en Proyecto 40, Diálogos con las Solas Ideas, me ha preguntado, bueno, ¿y cuándo? ¿Cuándo vas a entrevistar y cuándo nos vas a transmitir? Pues el diálogo con Louanne Brizendine, que escribió el famosísimo libro El cerebro de la mujer. Louanne es graduada de la Universidad de Berkeley y de la Universidad de Yale y por supuesto es una neurobiológica científica que ha estudiado a detalle realmente cuál es el tema de la testosterona, qué hace distinto al hombre y a la mujer en términos de relaciones emotivas, de relaciones afectivas, de relaciones de espacio, de relaciones de tiempo, de números y de palabras. Rompe mitos. ¿Qué tanto es cierto que los hombres son mejores que las mujeres en matemáticas? ¿Qué tanto es cierto que las mujeres son mucho más emotivas que los hombres? El cerebro de la mujer. Esta entrevista en una de las casas más hermosas que yo haya conocido, en la ciudad de Sausalito, muy cerca de la Universidad de Berkeley de California, nos recibe Louanne Brizendine, el cerebro de la mujer. Quédese a ver usted qué piensa. Louanne, it's really an honor to meet you.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
And your home, that it's beautiful, and here in Sausalito. Aquí en Sausalito estamos muy contentos de estar. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Louanne, the first question is, if you could introduce yourself, if you could talk to us and you tell us, well, now I am this person, before I was, I don't know whom, and more understanding the female brain. How much is that part of you?
You know, I started out in the 1970s at UC Berkeley as a feminist, and I started off actually in architecture school and ended up studying neuroscience at UC Berkeley. And over the years, after I did my medical school at Yale and then I did my residency in psychiatry at Harvard, I continued along my feminist track until I had my own son. And I must admit, that was when I had a mind change. I believed, like all of my other girlfriends at the time, we were going to give our children like gender-neutral toys. So I gave my son a doll when he was 4 years old. And of course, what did he do? He grabs it and he uses the legs as a spear, you know, chasing off the enemy. Little boys love to fight off the enemy and play the hero. I mean, that is wiring in almost every little boy. We watched the behavioral differences. But not until recently have we known that we all start off with a female brain at conception, and then at 8 weeks of fetal life, the male's tiny testicles start to pump out huge amounts of testosterone that marinates the brain and changes the circuits into the male brain. The female brain continues to develop unperturbed by testosterone. And we know that by the time we're either born with a male brain or a female brain.
Es impresionante cómo esta propuesta tuya ha generado tantas reacciones en el mundo. I mean, a lot of people have actually react to your book and to your thinking very strongly. They have supported, but everybody's talking about your book. Todo el mundo habla de tu trabajo. Muy interesante que empezaste siendo una feminista, that you started as a feminist. Hoy por hoy, ¿qué tanto tú puedes decir que la diferencia entre el hombre y la mujer es genética y qué tanto es realmente adquirido culturalmente? How much it really is genetical and it's part of our nature to be different?
So we know for sure that we have a few different genes, particularly the male has the Y and the female has the double X. Now, how much difference does that make after the brain makes itself into a male or female brain and by the time we're born? And then how much does it have to be how we're raised, how we're nurtured, what's done to us or not done to us, the expectations of our culture? It is profound, the expectations of our culture, because it acts on the brain. So we know now that the nature-nurture debate is dead, because everything that happens to you in the nurture or how you're raised or experiences from the culture become part of your brain circuits. All of your experiences end up changing your brain and your behavior.
Que el cerebro del hombre por lo regular sirve más para las matemáticas, se guía por el hemisferio izquierdo, y el de la mujer por el derecho, es decir, se guía más por las emociones y los sentimientos que el del hombre.
Las mujeres tienen la facilidad de hacer más cosas a la vez que los hombres.
Pues creo que físicamente no creo que haya una diferencia. Sí, simplemente es la ideología, ¿no? De cómo ve las cosas el hombre y cómo las ve la mujer, ¿no?
Bueno, el cerebro del hombre posiblemente es más grande, pero el de la mujer es más chico, pero es más inteligente.
Biológicamente, yo pensaría que no hay diferencia.
Hay muchísimas. O sea, las mujeres somos más sentimentales. No sé, y ustedes son más fríos.
I have a question, for example. Imagine now you have a travel and you go to another planet. And they ask you, hey, what do you have in terms of human beings in the Earth? And you have to tell them, well, we have men and we have women. We have male and we have female. And what are like the characteristics of each of them? Imagínate que te viajas a otro planeta y lo digo rápidamente, ¿cuáles serían las características de los hombres y de las mujeres? ¿Cómo se lo explicarías a un marciano?
We all have the drive to have offspring and reproduce, and we have a survival instinct. Males and females are more alike than they are different.
Okay.
But we all know from experience that little boys and little girls, for example, they have play that's very different. Little girls may sit play with each other and say, okay, now you be the mommy and I'll be the daddy, or you be the baby and I'll be the mommy. The little boys are running around and they may come play for a momentito, but they are out racing around, wrecking the girls' play. They play the hero. They like to fight off the enemies and be the hero and the victory. So we watch from that age, and then of course in puberty, from age 9 years old to 15, so 9 a las 15 años in the boy, his testosterone level goes up 25-fold. So a very big difference from 9 to 15. His brain then becomes marinated again in testosterone, changing the behavior to having fantasies about the female form, shall we say, and he is focused on female body parts in ways that are sometimes surprising to him, but he gets accustomed to them. Females then in the teenage years start to want to make themselves attractive to the male in all cultures. You look at other primitive tribes where they have the stretching of the earlobes, or the dots on the face, or the stretching of the neck or the lips, things that those little girls in that culture just wait until their teen years to be able to do to be attractive to the male. So many of these things are very hardwired in our development of our brain up until our adult years.
El de la mujer, por lo que decía, por los estímulos, cada uno como que los procesa de forma diferente.
Depende de la personalidad de cada quien. Hay mujeres y hombres emotivos iguales.
El de la mujer. No sé, nosotros vemos a alguien llorar y lloramos. Ustedes no. Ustedes piensan más las cosas.
Ahí sí, yo creo que es el de la mujer. lo veo, lo vivo.
Más emotivo, yo creo que el del hombre.
¿El hombre? ¿Por qué?
Porque es más sensible, se quiebra un poquito más que la mujer, por ejemplo, en un divorcio, en algo.
Yo siento que los dos, ¿eh? No es cierto que solamente la mujer puede por cualquier cosa llorar, ¿no? También el hombre, ¿no? A lo mejor se aguanta un poco, pero siento que los dos.
I was telling you by joke that in Mexico I expected that if somebody writes a book about the male brain, we will see just a remote control, I mean,
Soccer ball.
empty pages, soccer ball, and a mini skirt or a bra. It's really very different, and it's really much more simple, or is like much more like an archetype.
Actually, the reason males believe that they are more simple because they know how they think. And we females, we understand each other because we know how we think.
Claro.
So actually, it's sort of a stereotype joke that isn't really true. The male brain is much more sophisticated and complicated than you guys probably admit.
Absolutely.
We females, you know, we have our cycles where we have our hormones go up and down, and every day
Same thing with men.
may not be the same.
You mentioned that both male and female, well, we're looking for survival. We want to reproduce, we're kind, etc., etc. What about emotions in terms of tenderness? I mean, ¿qué tanto es un estereotipo que los hombres no somos tan sensibles como las mujeres?
So remember that for millions of years, the female brain has been involved in evolving to be very good at keeping helpless, nonverbal infants alive to survive. And so the female has had to be very, very good at reading what we call nonverbal expressions. The baby doesn't ask in words yet for what it wants. So it's no surprise that the females alive today are the best examples of those females, our grandmothers of the Stone Age, that were able to keep the helpless infants alive, reading nonverbal expressions, taking care of, helping survive, knowing what the infant needs before it even needs it. So that element of what we call empathy, right? Empathic, being on the same wavelength of another person, may be slightly better tuned in the females alive today than they are in the typical male.
It's important that you mention the typical because there are a lot of exceptions.
Many females, if you look at so important to know that when you say gender difference, you see the bell-shaped curve for females and you see a bell-shaped curve for males. You put a flagpole up in the middle of that hill, and the difference between the flagpoles is called the gender difference. But if you look down at the bell-shaped curve at the bottom, you have 10% overlap. So 10% of males will, on testing, look more like females. And so, you know, we humans are very much alike. And everything that you can do, I can do, basically. It may be easier for me to do certain things and easier for you, but there is overlap between the genders. There are some things that remain easier for females to do than males on average.
What kind of advice would you like to leave to, for example, the male that read the female brain book? If you say, well, if they could really learn, I don't know what, to understand better, to feel different, because I hope we are not like, well, predeterminados, and y que podamos cambiar.
So biological determinism makes us humans feel hopeless. The aspect of understanding what your biology is actually doing to you gives you more free will, gives you more ability.
You have to think about everything. I mean,
understand what the male thinks, what the female thinks. It helps you understand, for example, as a woman or as a man that wants to understand his woman better, what it's like to have 2 or 3 days or 4 days where your hormones are in different places, where you're seeing the world slightly differently. That doesn't make you a completely different person, but it does let you see the world through slightly different colored glasses, and that's helpful for men to know that. There's lots of men who would like to have a text message to them on the certain days of the month saying, you should bring your wife home flowers today or chocolates today, because it would be a nice day to be extra nice to her. These things are part of what makes us human and helps our relationships improve.
What was the methodology to reach these conclusions? How did you actually get here? For the people that say, well, yes, but I mean, this is not very serious. We know you told us you're Yale, Harvard, USC, etc. But what did you have to do to get here?
So I did my undergraduate degree in neurobiology at UC Berkeley. And to write the book, I reviewed 1,008 studies that are in the book. Actually, the publisher let me keep all of the references in the book. So I reviewed the body of literature and scientific studies in neuropsychology, in endocrinology, in neuropediatrics, in developmental psychology, in developmental neurobiology, neuroscience, and genetics. So the totality of that body of knowledge that was available went into making this book what it is.
Did you do directly experiments or field work?
So my work, my personal work, is in my clinic with my patients and also with work in clinical trials with various aspects of the behavioral effects of hormones in people, in men and women.
Okay. Just two questions very quickly. One is one that everybody talks about, monogamy. Is there a difference? If there is, who are we in this sense?
So we know from the literature and the scientific studies of human males and human females that on average, if you ask college-age males, how many sexual partners would you like to have in your life, or do you think you want in your life? The typical male says in his college years, in his 20s, he says, 14.
14 in the States?
Yes.
These are United States?
These are studies that have come out. And the typical female in her 20s will say, on average, they say 2. So there's a big difference there in terms of
Are they telling the truth?
In terms of what they wish for in their life. These are in private, in private interviews. And we know, for example, that all of one's life, males typically want more, say they want more sexual variety than females do. And aspects of the biology of why that might be true is that females in a sexual encounter, say she gets pregnant, she has 9 months of pregnancy, then she has years of keeping a helpless infant alive and raising a child. What we call her biological investment of a sexual encounter is very large. His is, as we say, hit and run.
But what would you expect? What would you like to know that the Latin American people, the Hispanic community, actually get from your book and from your work?
I think that you have a slightly different culture when it comes to what we call the culture of machismo in the Latin, and that is well known. And since I have traveled and discussed this book in many countries, Spanish-speaking countries before, one of the things that I get asked the question about most is, well, Dr. Brizendine, what about machismo? Will the male ever change? Do you think your book will help him understand the woman more? And will, what is this bit about machismo? So I think in your culture, the idea of a man being a man may actually be slightly more rigid than it is in some other countries, at least according to the women in your countries. That idea of machismo and manhood and being a man and not being able to show your softer sides that we all know men have is something I think that can come out of this work, to understand how empathy and compassion and tenderness in the what we call the daddy brain in fatherhood really brings out that side in men in a very wonderful way, and to have the Latino man feel like they're not, we say, in a straitjacket because of some stereotype of machismo.
Los dos.
Los dos tienen la misma habilidad y la misma capacidad para esa parte.
A la mujer, claro. Hombre, o sea, siempre va calculando gastos, lo que hay, lo que puede gastar en ropa y todo lo demás, ¿no?
Sí, hay mujeres muy inteligentes matemáticas, también hombres muy inteligentes matemáticos.
Es más matemático, yo creo que el de la mujer. Porque anda siempre buscando lo mejor, anda queriendo comprarse todo. Y es la que controla más el dinero.
Definitivamente, al parecer, el de los hombres. Son más calculadores.
En teoría general, el del hombre, porque se guía por el izquierdo, pero hay excepciones, hay buenas físicas, buenas químicas, entonces depende también de muchas circunstancias, pero raciocinadamente el del hombre.
We have talked about the male and female brain, about the machismo, about monogamy.
Did I say your word right, machismo?
Oh, very well. What has been the worst or the strongest criticism that you have received of your work done mainly by feminists, and what can we learn from it? Because there are like two spectrums of these theories.
So I think one of the dangers of saying that males and females are biologically different, which of course is obvious and we know that that's true. One of the dangers of emphasizing difference in any kind of way, whether you're saying racial difference or gender difference, differences make people be able to then blame someone else for who they are and say, oh, you're like that because of biology and you cannot be the other way. So I think you don't want to put anybody in a rigid category and say you're different, therefore you can't. For example, lots of girls in the States now are very, the engineering and the science and all kinds of scientific improvements in the schools in the States have led to many more girls graduating with very good backgrounds in physics and mathematics than before. So if you had said, oh, well, the female brain can't do math or science, you would
Remembering Summers, the president of Harvard.
Exactly. You don't want to say you're this way, therefore you can't be that way. So that's always the danger of talking about difference by saying this may be a difference in certain ways, but an individual person can be very, very much whatever way. We should celebrate the ability of each person to become the most complete human being they can be with whatever their gifts and talents happen to be, and not put them in a rigid category.
The last question, you are now writing the book, the male brain, no?
Mm-hmm. It's going to be called The Male Brain, and it's going to be a book for women about men.
Have you think about writing something about the homosexuals or?
So the gay brain, and you think about how it happens and of course in this country and in the States, it's very important to be very clear in the States that it's not a moral decision. That clearly you were born with a gay brain or a straight brain. You are born with what we call same-sex attraction brain circuits. So what happens in the teenage years when heterosexual males get interested in females, at the same time the homosexual males, the gay males, are being interested in same-sex, in males. And for the females, the same. During the teen years, they become interested in same-sex interest. So it's an unfolding at the same developmental time of life.
Increíble, tiene tantas implicaciones tu investigación que van a haber muchos libros sobre tus libros. A lot of people will write about your books, but of course it's an honor to meet you and thank you very much for your hospitality.
También.
Mucho gusto y con muchas ganas de verte en México. Muchas gracias. ¿Usted qué opina de lo que nos dice Louanne? Si tiene ganas de más, acompáñenos del 6 al 8 de noviembre para que en 21 minutos esta mente nos provoque, para que en viva voz en la Ciudad de las Ideas, en la ciudad de Puebla, pues tengamos la oportunidad de escucharla. Les recordamos, nuestra página es www.ciudadelasideas.com. Por supuesto, le agradecemos a nuestros patrocinadores y a gente como usted que esto lo haga posible. Louanne, el cerebro de la mujer. La repetición, si no lo pudo ver el programa hoy sábado, lo podrá escuchar el viernes de 6 a 6 y media de la tarde. Y le recordamos, todos los sábados a las 9 de la noche, en Proyecto 40, dialogamos con mentes provocadoras. Y recuerde, no crea todo lo que piensa. Muchas gracias.
La Ciudad de las Ideas, un festival sin precedentes, agradece el apoyo a las siguientes empresas socialmente responsables.